Hello, welcome back, Year 8. We're into our second lesson in our study of the Haitian Revolution. Now, from last lesson, you will recall that the Haitian Revolution was very much tied up with the French Revolution of 1789 to 1799. Today, what we're going to look at is what Haiti was like before the revolution. And before the revolution, it wasn't actually called Haiti. It was known as Saint-Domingue. That was the French name for that half of the island, which today is Haiti. And at the time, it was considered to be very, very valuable to France and the general French economy. Um, and that's what informs our title for this lesson, which is why was Saint-Domingue described as the pearl of the Antilles? I should just say the Antilles is that collection of islands in the Caribbean, of which Haiti is one. So, firstly, I want you just to jot down what sort of people wear pearls. Take a minute to write that down and then press play again. Okay, so you should have finished that now. Secondly, I want you to unpack the rest of this metaphor, and that is why might people in France in the 18th century have described a place, part of an island, as its pearl? It's a very interesting metaphor. Right. So you should have written down a range of things, but a pearl is it's a valuable object. It's rare, and it's something which people guard because of its value. Um, Saint-Domingue was incredibly valuable to France. It was France's most profitable colony, and that's one of our key words for this lesson. Colony is a country or area under the control of people from another country. So Saint-Domingue was not part of France, but France controlled it. It had its army there, and French people extracted wealth from the island and used that in France. Now, we're going to find out exactly what made Saint-Domingue such a profitable colony. Now, in your folder, in the Teams folder for this lesson, you'll find a fact file. Yeah, you can see here. Sugar was one of the most valuable commodities, items that were traded in the world economy in the 18th century, and Saint-Domingue produced 30% of the whole world's sugar. Now, that alone is reason to make it the pearl of the Antilles and to make it one of the most valuable colonies in the whole world. But it also produced a huge amount of coffee. In fact, by 1790, it was producing 50% of the whole world's coffee. And that made the French government incredibly rich. In fact, they used the profits from taxing sugar and coffee to finance their whole navy, which is an incredible statistic there. But it's also provided jobs and trade. So what I'd like you to do is, using that fact file, just write an answer as far as best you can to that question, which is why we stand the bank. So try to use some of these terms you can see here. So trade, certainly use them already. Economy, profit, power, economy, and result. Try to use at least three of these key phrases for them to answer. Something we haven't quite touched on so far, but it's what made Saint-Domingue so wealthy in the first place. The valuable commodities that you just wrote about were incredibly labor intensive. Now, what that means is, in an age before sophisticated machines, they had to be cultivated and harvested by hand. Now, it's hard enough doing those things, on farms in cold countries where there, aren't that many diseases. But it was next to impossible to pay people to work on sugar or coffee plantations in the Caribbean. This led people to import or kidnap and import huge numbers of slaves, enslaved human beings from Africa. It's really starting from the early 17th century, so 1600s, and this trade grew and grew and grew throughout the 18th century, and it was really only phased out, abolished in the 1800s. Now, in total, about 1.2 million enslaved Africans were kidnapped and brought to the colony between 1600 and 1790. This accounted for about 10% of the total slave trade. Conditions on the island of Saint-Domingue were notoriously brutal. Even for other slave islands, Saint-Domingue was known to be one of the most brutal places for an enslaved person to live. About half of all the enslaved people died within 3 years of arriving. Around 6% died each year. Now, the slave owners had a choice, so they could reduce that number by improving conditions on the plantations, or they could just write that off, that person's death, as an expense and then import more. They chose the second option, which led to a huge amount of people being brought over from Africa to Haiti. And you can see here the triangular trade which made this possible. So it started in Europe, manufactured goods, things that were made, like guns or things that were made, such as alcohol, would be brought over to the west coast of Africa and exchanged for kidnapped human beings, who were then transported across the Atlantic, which is why we call it the transatlantic slave trade, to the Caribbean, but also to North America. And the goods that those enslaved people produced were then put on ships and taken back across the Atlantic to be sold at an incredible profit in Europe, in France, in Britain, and so forth. So we're going to start on another activity. You can see here there are two sources, source A, source B. Source A is an engraving of sugar making from an encyclopedia in 1751. Source B is advice to slave planters by a plantation manager from 1765. Both of them are discussing Saint-Domingue. I want you to have a read through of them, okay, and then copy this table out into your books and answer the question. So, what can you see in source A? What does it tell you about slavery? Then the second column, I want you just to write what this source, that one, tells you about slavery specifically in Saint-Domingue. So if you could just pause the video and make a start on that for source A and then source B. So source A shows a quite an advanced machine for the time, which was used for crushing sugar cane. So sugar that grows in quite long canes, and the juice has to be extracted from that cane by crushing it, and that's what that machine does. And you can see the woman there, putting the cane through these moving sort of parts. Very, very dangerous activity. Many enslaved people who were tired or had been working for days, particularly in the harvest season, would get their hands caught in these machines. This happens so often, in fact, that there would be a machete, which is like a long knife left by the machines, and that was used to chop off the person's hand if it got caught in the machines. So that tells you quite a lot about the conditions on these plantations. And you can see an example that I've written up there for you. The next source describes punishments given to slaves, and this is written by a plantation manager. His name was Devassier in 1765. you've read through that. You can see here some things about that source, things that we can see quite clearly, and then on the second column, some inferences that we can make from it. Okay, so that should have taken you approximately 20 minutes or so.